This is Andy Gutierrez from StarWars.com, and you are listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Z. This is the podcast you're looking for.
This is Vanessa Marshall, Harrison Dula from Star Wars Rebels, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
Joining us today for a cup of coffee to talk about the second film in the Indiana Jones franchise are two returning guests. First, he is the host, creator, I won't say co-creator because I'm used to saying that, but he's the creator of the album Cockpit Podcast, the one and only Ross Hollebon. Ross, welcome back to the show.
Dan, thank you so much for having me, and no better time than to be here with this dynamic duo under the same roof.
That's right. That's a good thing. Oh, I also, of course, Ross is writing, you know, very well from Faint the Tracks. Ross, as always, you are killing it, brother.
Yeah, thank you. There's always good stuff to talk about and then good people to share it with. So that's it is very fortunate the times that we are in.
Absolutely. Well, that is a great transition. A really good person to talk to. He is about to go on the Star Wars Galactic Star Cruiser for his second voyage. It's going to be his actual birthday. The one and only Mason Zehr. Mason, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. I feel like I've been on here a lot for Bad Batch and all the shows I've done recently.
We're going to talk about Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. This is the sequel to Raiders of the Lost Ark, but it's actually, as far as in story goes, it is a prequel. Ross, do you know why that is?
No, I don't know. You're going to crush me on trivia with this one. I guarantee it.
Mason, do you know why?
Yes, because they show the dates of the time.
Yeah, it does take place in story a year earlier. Now, there are two out-of-story reasons why this happened. One is that George did not want to have the Nazis as the bad guys again, so they went backwards before Raiders of the Lost Ark to make that happen. And then also because he did not want Marion to show up again. He wanted it to be a different female co-hero in every Indiana Jones movie. Now, my guess is, and it's been a while since I read the making of the Indiana Jones books, but my guess is because James Bond was the original impetus for the idea of this character anyway, that might have something to do with it. Now, from a story perspective, that's where things get a little murky. That the whole story is, it's easily the darkest of all four Indiana Jones films. At the time of this recording, we have not seen 5. But let's start like we always do before we dive a little bit deeper, or dig a little deeper, since we are talking about Indiana Jones, into the second film. Ross, we'll start with you. Give me one word to describe this film for you and overall thoughts on it.
Energy. Like that. It's nonstop. When I saw this, I was 9.5 years old. Almost a year to the day at the same theater in Ocean City, Maryland, where I saw Return of the Jedi. And I got an extra sensory feeling for this film as we went, because I got the worst sunburn I've ever had. And the night after the movie, had to get put by my mom and 2 of her nurse friends, as I'm almost 10 years old, naked into a tub of ice and water because I was that burned. And it was just like, you talk about a traumatic experience. Everyone was like, "Are you okay after this film?" Because I came out and I was lobster red and shivering.
Oh, no.
But I didn't care the whole time. I was just like, this is unbelievable. And just, everything that happened in there, you talk about it being a little bit darker, a little bit scarier. And they really pushed that by combining a lot of elements into the bad guys of this. But just what a wild ride. So fun.
So you were the same age that Mason was when he first saw it. 9.
Love it.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Okay, Mason, one word to describe Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom.
This is a hyphenated word, non-stop action.
Okay.
Because there's so much action in it. And when you think, oh, no, it's going to stop, they just put some more into it. And it's so energetic the way they do that.
All right. I like that. Well said. Very well said. My word to describe Indiana Jones and Temple of Doom, that's tricky. I think this word would have evolved. My thoughts on this film have evolved more than my thoughts on any of the Indiana Jones films. My thoughts on the other films, Raiders, Last Crusade, Crystal Skull, And again, we haven't seen the Dial of Destiny yet. They've all been pretty much the same, but my appreciation of them has sort of grown. This one has been a bit of a mix for me. So the word I'm going to use for it as of now, 2023, is dark. This film is dark. When it was made, George Lucas and Steven Spielberg were going through divorces, so they were probably in a very challenging place emotionally and mentally, and it very much shows on screen. That being said, I really think this is a fascinating, compelling film with a very unique pacing, very much very action heavy, but also not action heavy, which we will talk about. So very interesting. I'm looking forward to when we're done with all these Indiana Jones conversations of ranking all 5 films. We'll see how it goes. All right, so Mason, let's start with the newest character. There are 2 major new characters. Well, Mola Ram, I wouldn't say he's a major character. He's only in half the film, if that, screen time wise. But the 2 major new characters into the Indiana Jones lexicon of characters are Short Round and Willie Scott. Let's talk about Short Round first. Mason, I want to let you start with Short Round. What do you think about him? Was he effective for you?
I think Short Round has a big play in this movie because he thinks of Indy as a father figure, and he saves him from like when they made him think he was bad, and when he was getting captured, he like stopped the little kid from stabbing that little puppet thing.
The voodoo doll, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And he just helped Indy a lot throughout this film.
So, could you give Short Round a letter grade?
10 out of 10, A+.
Because you told me something cool about Short Round. What you said something interesting about Short Round when you were watching him. Do you remember what it was?
He reminds me of me.
Yeah. And why is that?
Because he's small, and when he sees something cool, he wants to be like it.
Oh, that's great. That's pretty cool. And you also said you thought you guys would be buddies.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you would too. But hey, no exploring caves without your dad, okay?
Okay.
Or Yankees hats.
Oh, yeah. We'll get to that too. Ross, what about you? Tell me about Short Round.
Amazing to see this character. And, at the time, you if there's a kid in a movie with adults, that person probably needs to be saved all the time or helped, or they're the victim. Short Round was not the victim, and he was positive energy. And how do we go after this? And so much like Mason said, just idolizing Indiana as we're going through it and watching him and sticking up for him. If Willie's talking back or someone's doing something, he's like, I need to go protect him, or call him. It's Dr. Jones, not, however, but that just great energy he brought to it. And it just, any kid watching it. So it's so cool imagining Mason watching that today, but any little kid watching that almost the same way as in Goonies for this actor, just making kids believe they can do these things and strive to do it. So it's just super fun.
When we were watching it, Mason, you mentioned that he was sort of like Robin to Batman. And I think that's a pretty apt comparison because in the classic comics and most good versions of that character, Robin, while he may not be the physical equal of Batman, he very much is capable of taking care of himself. He may need to be saved, but he can save just as easily when it comes to the 2 main characters. And I can honestly say I've always loved Short Round. I always thought he was a great character. I always wish we could have seen more of Ke Huy Quan's. Is it Ke Huy Quan?
I'm going to say yes.
I think it is. Of course, recent Oscar winner as an adult.
Absolutely.
A terrific guy, terrific actor. He is tremendous as Short Round. He's very charismatic. He's very funny and charming. And I think he's essential to this film because there's so many dark things and so many dark layers that you need to add some lightness to some really heavy stuff. Because Indiana Jones isn't necessarily going to provide that. Willie certainly isn't going to provide that. Oh, well, she does to a certain degree, but we'll get to her in a second. So I've always liked Short Round. I always thought it found him to be really, really fun and charming and charismatic. And a perfect sort of a foil to Indiana Jones because Indy does... It's the only time, truly, well, until Crystal Skull a little bit, that we see Indy as a paternal character, as like a father figure type. Usually just kind of this sort of anti-swashbuckling professor, archaeologist, adventurer. He's very single-minded and driven. But for this one, he's got short round to look after, and I love him. I think he's great, and I want to get all the short round action figures too.
Yes.
Now let's talk about Willie Scott. Willie is, well, Mason, you start. Tell me about Willie.
She's kind of like an older version of Short Round, but not as helpful. And is more like, I'm a singer. I can't do anything like that.
Do you like her better than Marion?
No.
No. Okay. Well, I have a feeling that will come up. Ross, what about you? I keep wanting to call you Buster because you put your name as Buster Posey.
Yeah, you have to work that in, right? I have to live in the glory days based off of where we are now.
Well, hey, you're talking to a Cubs fan, mister.
No, Kate Capshaw's Willie Scott. Again, another fun change of pace for the franchise after Raiders of the Lost Ark. You know, she's not there slugging shots with someone back and forth. She's in there as an entertainer and really as a diva who just happens to get caught in this thing because she's so desperate to get the diamond at the beginning. And it forces her down this path. And next thing you know, she's jumping out of airplanes, having snakes on her shoulder, getting a bath from an elephant. And then that's before all the real action gets going. But I thought she was brilliant for the role that she played. I don't know that this role would happen quite the same way today.
I agree with that. And she has said on record several times that scene where that boa constrictor goes over her shoulder, she was so petrified to do that scene because she does not like snakes at all. But Steven walked her through it. This, of course, is the film where Steven Spielberg met Kate Capshaw, and that's where they fell in love, and they're still married to this day. So that's pretty cool in and of itself. I think Willie Scott is appropriately playfully annoying, and she's supposed to be. Kate Capshaw's performance is absolutely brilliant. She knocks this out of the park because she's very egocentric and self-centered. She's also never been in a situation like this. She is the ultimate person as far as liking her creature comforts. And then she's out of her comfort zone with a lot of creatures. Bugs crawling in her hair, snakes, bats. She's dirty. She's riding elephants, getting knocked off of elephants. Just being around Indiana Jones, it just couldn't be a worse thing for her. But, of course, Indiana Jones has that animal magnetism and charm, and she is drawn to that. I found something interesting watching this film for I don't know how many times I've seen it, a lot of times. At the beginning, there's this huge musical number, and Willie Scott sings Anything Goes. But I believe it's in Chinese. I believe that's correct.
Everything but the title of the song.
The title of the song stuff, Anything Goes. Right. It's an old classic song. So Steven Spielberg created the opening of this because he always wanted to direct a musical. Obviously, later he would create or direct a remake of West Side Story, which was very successful. But this was his first on-screen foray into creating a musical number. And I found it really interesting. I was sort of channeling the grad school film class I just took. And so while I'm watching this, when the film starts, the text is Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom shows up. And when Willie is standing there, she is in front of the text. She's in front of the credits. And to me, that is because in her mind, she comes before everything else. She comes before everything that happens in this picture. She comes way before Indiana Jones. It's all about her, and she is so much the center in her own world that she's in front of the actual font, which I thought was a really brilliant thing. And then the entire sequence where she goes back inside that dragon, and there's that huge musical number that theoretically the people in Club Obi-Wan, hello, thank you very much for that Easter egg. They obviously can't see that, and the outfits are different anyway. It's this big magical musical number, and I always enjoyed it for what it was, but I never thought about what it means in picture. But inside the story, I really feel like in her mind, life is a fantasy. Life is a carnival. Life is a big musical number, and she's the star. She's the main attraction. So these are her backup dancers doing this beautiful choreographed stuff. You know, in fact, they're even going up doing splits, and then the film rewinds, and they go backwards and do it in reverse, the kick line in reverse order. And I just, it really struck me how perfectly to her, this is the world, which is why it's even more entertaining, if that's the word I want to use, that she is thrown into this adventure when in her mind, life is about musicals and she's the star.
I love that. And I love that along with the song, when they're at the table and Indy grabs Willie, he slips in a joke and says anything goes.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I love that.
Or anything goes. He has that like big fork thing. It's really, really good. So very compelling. Let's talk about Indy. Since this is a prequel, ideally, if a character changes in a story, then in a prequel, they should be a little bit different than they are in the other things we've known. So, Ross, this is kind of a tricky one. Is Indiana Jones different in this film than he is in Raiders of the Lost Ark? And if so, how?
Let's see his differences in this.
I got to think about it too. I don't know. I have an idea, but I'm not entirely sold on it.
I mean, he's very refined at times. We get to see more of that. Not that we didn't see that when he's the professor teaching class at other times, but seeing him talk to the ruler of the palace and his approach there versus, I think it shows, I think we saw some of the metamorphosis a little bit more in this of him going from the scholar into the swashbuckler, where we kind of dove into it a little bit more before. Here we're getting him in the tux in Club Obi-Wan. We're getting all of his strategy playing out first. And hey, this guy's dangerous. He's not just an archaeologist, climbing through holes and into crevices and up mountains and things. He's a strategist and he's playing a very dangerous game. So I think seeing that the stakes are that much higher right off the bat, and that he's dealing with criminals to accomplish what he wants to accomplish. Mm-hmm. And I think that shows a little bit more about who he is as a character and his younger start, even if it's just a year younger.
That's interesting. He is working with criminals. I hadn't thought about that before. So Ross, adding on to that, would you say then that he changes and grows by Raiders of the Lost Ark as far as his philosophy of why he does what he does? Or do you think it's just a slight alteration? Or maybe it's none at all?
I think it's just that maturation any of us go through. Like these were not easy events he went through. So it becomes something where, okay, yeah, I just watched, this guy rip someone's heart out and the person stayed alive. It's not going to be that big of a deal the next thing that he finds. Okay. So, you learn from every experience you have and it helps create who you are. And I think Harrison did that in a wonderful way with Indiana to just continue that elevation of who he is as a character.
I like that very much. Mason, what about you? I know you've seen Raiders a couple times. I think the last time we watched it was 2 Father's Days ago, so it's been a bit. What would you say you've noticed is different about Indy in this movie compared to the other one?
I don't think there's much things that are different, except because in both movies he's like, action, I have to do this to help these people. But in this movie, he shows more like feelings towards kids, I think.
And that, I think, is a massive, massive part of it. Earlier in the film, he makes cracks about fortune and glory. He even jokes about that with Short Round about why he's going to take on this mission. But when they show his face, when he sees, you see he's an empathetic person. When they crash into India, he's incredibly respectful from the bat. He knows their cultures. He knows their customs. He bows to the tribesman, who's the spiritual leader of the village. And who is, by the way, a real Indian actor. And he didn't even speak English. He learned his lines phonetically. So even though when he was saying them, he learned them phonetically. So he didn't even know the English language. He didn't even know what he was saying. But he's very, very good. A very respected actor. His name escapes me, so I apologize for that.
It is Dr. Nanayakara.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate you looking
I know I butchered that, but that is my best attempt off of reading it.
That's great. So he, the fortune glory thing is there. Yes, he does deal with gangsters, but here's the thing: how did they end up with this diamond? And he is turning over Nurhachi, which is the ashes of a great ancient Chinese leader. The first dynasty, I can't remember the name. I should have written that down. So that is a bit problematic. I don't think it makes him anti-hero, but it does mean that he obviously will do whatever it takes to get the job done. So he probably skirts the morality of what this actually means to be an archaeologist and a professor. I don't know. We don't know that backstory, but it's certainly worth exploring or sort of thinking about.
Well, and I think that's also, Dan, a little bit of a lead in to the stones later, where it becomes more important to him to get the stone back as opposed to, hey, you know what, I could take this somewhere and do something with it. And then he explains it to Willie that way.
Exactly. And that's an excellent point. He wants to get these stones back because he believes in the power of these artifacts, right? This is before Raiders of the Lost Ark, so he has not seen the Ark of the Covenant. He has not seen the power of God in person to the degree that he will next year when he is in the adventure Raiders of the Lost Ark. So he wants to help these people because he believes that they've been wronged. He wants to find these things. Of course, he's intrigued by the notion of it, but it's with the children, and they do a great close up of his face, and you can really tell that he's perspiring. And he's looking around. He looks very, very disturbed that these children are gone. So again, you see, this is a man that cares. Yes, he wants the adventure and the excitement, and he's really, really good at it. But it's for these kids. But then that kind of goes away, and he goes on his mission. I don't really know what goes on through his mind when that happens. But every time when they first come to the statue, there is like human sacrifice on it, and just a lot of ghastly stuff. He refuses to let Short Round go up there because he's like Mason said, he's a good paternal figure, a good father figure. He's not going to let Short Round have that in his psyche. They get to the palace. And I think throughout this movie, we do see what is the ultimate thing for him that registers is the cruelty of Mullah Ram to people in general, but especially towards children. And he is not going to leave this place until all these kids are free. Now, we've already seen that he's a compassionate person before, but Raiders of the Lost Ark is a very different thing. It's against the Nazis. I think he wants to stop the Nazis because he wants to get the Ark from them. He doesn't want them to have it, but he really wants it, and he does not like Belloc at all. But I feel like Temple of Doom is even more personal because of the kids, because Short Round is there. And I think that makes for a very compelling argument. Is he a different character? I don't know. I think the thing that's always been framed is he's different because of why he goes hunting for treasure, why he's an archaeologist. And I think that's interesting, but I think it's also worth exploring too.
This is Vanessa Marshall, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
All right, so let's move on from that. This movie is full of great action sequences and moments. So let's kind of talk about that. Mason, what is your favorite action moment? Or maybe you if you have two, you can certainly talk about those as well.
Probably my favorite, it's basically an action moment, but it is when Indy and Short Round go down the tunnel, and then the spikes start coming down, and Willie is scared to go and save them. And it's like the spikes are right next to their faces when she stops it.
That's great. I love that scene too, very much. We talk about that a lot when we watch it. Do you have another one that you like as well?
I also like when they're trying to get out of there on the train, and then when they show up on the bridge.
Oh, cool. Very cool. And that reminded you of that Indiana Jones Lego game for the Wii, didn't it?
Yeah.
Good game. All right, Ross, what about you? Favorite action moments?
I love right out of the gate, even from the time that, you mentioned it already with Willie jumping in front of the graphics and everything about the film, but just as soon as he drinks that poison and they know they have him, and then all of a sudden just you're getting champagne bottles popping, you're getting a gunshot happening, and then it's just utter chaos. And I wasn't ready for it yet. It was just like, okay, we had just sat down, the credits are rolling, how are we going to build into this? And it was just everywhere. You're getting the ice kicked over, hiding the diamond. You're having Willie scrambling across the floor, Indy going everywhere else, the bad guys everywhere, and then just all these diners in the restaurant. And then just that iconic scene of, even though you're seeing the bullet holes go through it as the gong is rolling and they're hiding behind it to jump out the window. And you're like, ooh, okay, good. But you only get to catch your breath for a couple seconds, and then it's a car chase happening again. So it is, as Mason mentioned earlier, it is that nonstop action. And I love how it started with that right out of the gate.
It's very similar to Raiders. Raiders, as soon as he goes into the Well of Souls, and in here it's as soon as he escapes from the Kali, what is it called? The sleep. Once you get the Kali sleep, you never wake up again. Like it's a nightmare that you were living in. Once he breaks free of that, thanks to Short Round saving him, the whole rest of the movie is completely nonstop action. I'd be hard pressed to pick a good one. I love both examples that you gave. I love the opening. I love that Indiana Jones is sort of ironically channeling his inner James Bond, as I talked about on the live show this week. I also love the sequence where there's that trap with the bugs that Mason talked about, where the spikes are coming down. John Williams' score is fantastic, and I still maintain that's the closest, perhaps, that Indy actually comes to dying in the entire franchise, because it's if not for Willie kind of stumbling her way through, that's over.
Yeah.
But I think my favorite moment is one that is something we don't even see. It's when Indy says, "We're getting out of here, all of us," and they show these three guys, and all of a sudden they pan up to Indiana Jones, and he's standing there, and he's got his hat on, and one of his sleeves is, well, actually his sleeve isn't torn yet, but he's just standing there, and all of a sudden you hear these three punches, and this guy goes sliding across the gravel. I've got goosebumps now. Sliding across the gravel, and I said to Mason, he is so mad, and he is so determined, and he is so ready to kick these guys' tooties. We'll keep it a family show. And it's very effective, and it's one of the few times where they pan up to Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones to show him as larger than life and menacing. One of the few times in any of these films that they do that, just like George does with Darth Vader. And I think that's cool because they do a lot of switching of Force perspective in this film, because sometimes you're seeing things through Willie's lens, as I mentioned earlier, and through this, we're seeing it through the thuggy, through the evil cult figures, because they're looking at this guy and they know they are in massive trouble. And it's just it's a great action scene, but it's a great character moment too.
Yeah, just it builds tension throughout. So you don't know what's going to happen next, and yeah, just so well done. But this is Spielberg, so we got spoiled on it as kids watching it.
That's right. By the way, Mason has never seen Goonies. I think that'll be a fun. You'll like Goonies, Mason. It's about a bunch of kids, including Short Round. He's not playing Short Round, but it's the same kid.
Mason, I want to hear immediately what you think once you finally watch that. It is one of my favorite movies of all time, but especially my childhood.
Goonies, yeah, it's great. We saw it in theaters all the time. All right, so those are some great action moments that we've talked about, but we've talked about the darkness in this film and theoretically why those things have happened. And Spielberg and George have talked about this. They think they took it too far. But so Mason, I obviously showed it to you. There's some really scary stuff. What do you think is the darkest or hardest parts about this movie that might make it harder for some younger kids to see?
I think some people might say when the heart is ripped out, but I think it's when they first show the kids and they're being enslaved like slaves, and they're being tortured by all these people ordered by Mola Ram.
I'd be hard pressed to disagree with you there. Ross, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, you don't think about it when you're that young and seeing, you can't even imagine kids being put in that predicament. So that was, that's horrifying. But I think so many elements of this were kind of that shock value. Like even the food they served, like that to me was something I remember, because I'm no different than Indiana Jones when it comes to snakes. Like I'm deathly afraid.
Oh, really? So is Corey.
Yeah, seeing Snake's surprise come out, and it's just like, oh my god! And then it's, the eyeball soup. It's the Beatles were fine. I definitely would have had one of the Beatles,
Like John or Ringo.
exactly.
Yeah.
with their hard shell hair, of course. And then the chilled monkey brains, even where it's just like, oh my god, all of this is nuts. So there isn't necessarily recovery time in a lot. You're seeing this village where these mothers have lost their children, and even that, like their eyes and feeling the darkness that's over them. This entire thing was brooding, like you said, other than when Short Round was adding some comic relief in just through some witty lines that he would work in here and there.
Definitely. Those are the stuff with the kids. When Indy is looking sort of reflectively about what he's going to do, it's the evening, and then that child escapes and comes down, and he just has that like look, like he looks like he has seen many better days, and he just looks famished and weak and just traumatized, and it's just so compelling. And then, like Mason said, when you see all these kids being treated like this, being taken from their families, that bothers me. It bothered me more as a dad, especially when you were first born, Mason. I really like. For the longest time, I'm like, I don't like this movie because I just thought about how it might affect you. But now that you're older and we've watched it together, I think I'm able to appreciate more sort of the good qualities that it has. But that combined with the stuff with the human sacrifice and all this stuff is mythological. I don't think there's no such thing as a thuggy cult in these ideas of these Shankara stones. But it's bothersome that these things exist in this film, or that the way people sometimes will treat other people is frightening, especially when it's kids. And having Short Round there, normally you think, oh no, he's a kid, he's going to be in trouble too, he's captured, but you never really worry about Short Round because, again, as we said, he's resourceful and he's been trained by the best, or at least he's been around the best in Indiana Jones, and he just refuses to let himself, as you both mentioned, be victimized. He escapes, and the kids cheer for him, and I think that helps to give you sort of a seatbelt in a situation that's really, really upsetting. But as we've said, the humor, there's a lot of humor in this. It's a funny movie. Are there certain funny parts that really made you laugh, or that really jumped out to you? Ross, I see you smiling. What do you think?
Yeah, just there's so many quips. There's so many like quick one-liners. I love when they're playing cards.
Yes.
What a fantastic part. And I read something that was a little bit more, they worked so well together that they just kind of let that ride. It wasn't, hey, here's your lines. It's play this out a little bit. Like you're both kind of cheating and working your way through. So giving them that and learning that this late in life and then watching it again, man, what an incredible acting job on both sides, but especially from Key. Like that's amazing. So just super fun. And then obviously the playful banter and, a little bit more mature theme discussion between Indy and Willie before bedtime, which is every time I watch it, it's just kind of like, man, this is just smart right now. Like these are fun back and forths.
I love how you said that, before bedtime. That's pretty funny. All right, Mason, I know you laughed a lot in this thing. What are some of your favorite moments that are humorous?
Mine's probably the same as Ross when they're playing cards and Short Round notices that Indy's cheating and he has more than 4 cards. And they says, no, you're cheating. And he says, no, you're cheating. It's not fun to play with you, Dr. Jones. No fun.
I love the chemistry there between the two. I love, as far as there's a couple of really funny ones. There's one like when this hammer gets thrown and there's 3 guys in there and one hammer hits a guy on the head and you hear like the 3 Stooges bonk and he falls down, which is a little unexpected. The reactions to the food is humorous, but I really like the playfulness of Indy around Willie, and not just when he's trying to be sort of his own. I don't know how to describe it appropriately, but he definitely is someone who thinks he's trying to charm her, and he thinks he's pretty clever while he's doing it, and that's sort of funny to watch. But I really like all you call him Dr. Jones, doll. I just think that's funny. Like, and then Indy says, my professional name, and he flips short round a coin. I think that's pretty fun too.
No, those are super fun. And they melded so many opportunities in a very tough film sometimes to watch it, but there are so many great comedic events. I
agree. So as we wrap up, I see they're about to serve the snake surprise. I know that Ross does not want to be here when we have that delicacy. What is there anything that we didn't talk about? Ideas, set pieces, action moments, anything that you would like to talk about before we close things down? And Mason, you want to start?
I have nothing.
Nothing? Okay. Ross?
The conveyor belt fight was fantastic.
With Pat Roach.
Yeah. And as that's going on, and then you have that fight going on, but you have Short Round up top fighting the other kid and trying to prevent the voodoo doll from being used. That's just fun. And that again got a little bit of a graphic ending, but it was just like, it was such a great payoff. Because even as a kid, I remember just being like, oh yeah, the bad guy got it kind of thing. I don't think this had much to do. It probably doesn't have anything to do with Star Wars at all, but there was a fulcrum release lever. So when they said that, I got very excited, and I was just like, ooh, especially with what came out today.
With Ahsoka.
And then, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
And then just the storytelling and how that built with the beginning where it's the palace has the power of the dark light. And then everything kept building out of that until we saw it and until it was put out. So I just loved the narrative and how they kept pushing it forward, even with this incredible action.
That's cool. The bridge moment that I think, Mason, you mentioned earlier in the show, that bridge action sequence is absolutely dynamite. It's extraordinarily tense. The way it was filmed, I'm pretty sure they filmed it on that actual bridge. And it's very, very, even when you know what's going to happen, the way the music is, the look on Harrison's face, the ricketiness of the thing, the fact that there are alligators or crocodiles underneath it, the fact that Indy wraps himself around the bridge to try to survive. I remember so many times in my mind as a kid playing that out, thinking if that would actually work and what I would do in that situation. I know what I would do in that situation. I'd probably die. But it's just the stunt work is great. And when Harrison's just got the one sleeve on, he worked out a ton for this movie. He's never looked better. He looks awesome. Yeah. He just and the fedora, I don't know if you guys notice this, I'm kind of a gearhead when it comes to Indiana Jones, but the fedora is significantly shorter. The top part is much shorter than it is in Raiders of the Lost Ark, and the brim around it is a little bit shorter as well. I'm not sure the decision behind that. So I notice it, but it works because he's in so many tight spaces that he's got to keep that thing on. There's that great gag when they're about to be recaptured inside that trap where the walls are closing, and it's just when it's about to close, he puts his hand in and grabs the hat out just to make sure, because you got to have your fedora if you're Indiana Jones.
You're right.
Fantastic. All right, let's letter grade time. Mason, give your letter grade and explain why you're giving it the grade that you have.
I would give this one an A because it's a fantastic movie. And there's like almost nothing they could do better except make it like a Harry Potter movie or something like that. Okay,
well, I'm glad. This makes me so happy because I think it's fair to say you were not sure about what you were going to think before you watched it, and you loved it. Does it make you like the character of Indiana Jones more, less, or the same?
I think it makes me like him more, and I think the reason that his hat is like a little bit smaller is because there's a year between the movies, and they want him to grow between the movies.
Oh, that is really deep. Wow, look at you.
Bang, bang.
Bang, that's great. What an insight. If I had the sound effects, I would be giving you a round of applause now. Okay, Ross, you get to follow that. Letter grade and overall explaining of your grade. And you're a professor anyway. We were actually talking to a professor.
Yeah, so that is, always fun.
You got to wear a fedora to school, man. You got to.
I have a gray one, not quite the same as that, but I rock that every once in a while.
It's his travel one that he wears in Raiders.
Yeah, I have to go A+, if only for nostalgia. It just energized me so much as a kid. It set my imagination on so many different levels. It was teaching me, it's not factually correct in a lot of areas, and a lot of things are made up, but it made me think more about different cultures as he's experiencing different things. So all of this factored in, like, put aside the toys that I had, and I definitely had that taller G.I. Joe thing that was like taller than a Barbie, which was one of my favorite toys. But, the whole way around, the action, the music, it's so iconic, and it just stood out. I probably enjoyed this more than Raiders of the Lost Ark as a kid. I don't know that I do now, but they're peanut butter and jelly to me. Just give me some bread, and I'll take both of these together every day of the week.
That's such a good analogy. Bravo! Woo! You two are on fire. Here's the interesting thing. Like, if you'd asked me again a few years ago, before the rewatch I did with Mason this week, I'm sure I would have had a very, very different lens of which I was filtering this movie. But I appreciate the way the story is told, the originality. It's got to be hard to make a movie after Raiders of the Lost Ark, the greatest action movie of all time. It was an extraordinary success at the box office. Won a lot of awards, nominated for Best Picture. This one is way darker. Harrison is great. The new cast is really charismatic. I didn't give Raiders an A+, and my reason was because it's not like it's The Godfather. I almost wish I didn't have that sort of a rubric for this, and I don't know that I can give this an A+ and not give Raiders an A+. The challenge for me is that I've seen Raiders so many times, I almost know every word by heart, including the ticks and the sound effects and the musical cues, whereas this one is not as fresh in my mind. So it gives me a bit more of a glaze to it. That being said, I will give it an A-, the highest A- that you can give it, just because it wouldn't be fair to put it higher than Raiders. But it is a fantastic, well-made film with some really dark themes. There's one, if I could explain the A-, there's one really awkward edit where there's all this fighting and action. All of a sudden, we just cue to the scene where he's fighting the big guy, the big Pat Roach character on the conveyor belt. There is no logical transition or build up to that fight. It just sort of clicks, and he goes and punches him. And the scene even feels like it's on a different sound stage. So that's the only quibble I could have as far as storytelling goes.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense from a technical perspective.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are, with Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is...
Fantastic. Well, thank you both so much for talking about Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Next week, of course, we'll talk about Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade as we get closer and closer to Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. But I want to thank you both, Mason and Ross, for coming on the show. Ross, please let everybody know where they can find you, and please share more information about the album Cockpit Podcast, which I believe you first announced on this show.
Yeah, so I did get to announce it here a little while ago. I'll be recording the 17th episode tomorrow night. So on the new Foo Fighters album. So it is cool. Getting a fan of a big album, and every one of them to this point has typically been older, at least by a couple years. So this will be the first brand new album, but it's a returning guest, Ashley Brienzo, who does a lot of Star Wars sketch card art and has a lot of her own art that she does. And she's just such a big Foo Fighters fan that I was just like, hey, we need to hop on here and let's give it 1 week and give reaction to that. So been spending a lot of time with that album, but have Greg McLaughlin from Rebel Bass Card coming up soon to do Copper Blue by Sugar. Amy Mulder's going to come on soon to do American Idiot by Green Day.
Cool.
So just trying to hit a lot of different. I need to work some more hip hop in there, but other than that, getting some good album breakdowns from track 1 through the entire album. And you can listen to it on Spotify and hear the music as we go.
And it's if it's okay with your producer, I'm fine with you sharing certain caffeinated podcasters' appearance as well.
Oh, and this is funny because you were one of the very first people kind of booked into at least an album, but our schedules have not been friendly with each other at all. And then we were just like, oh, let's wait until the Star Cruiser trip is done, and we can just enjoy it. But I have listened to it multiple times after having never listened to it before. But Paul Stanley's first solo album, and it is rock and roll, and I can't wait to talk about it.
Oh, 1978, it's my favorite Kiss album. Cannot wait. And also, where can people find your writing, and just if they want to chat with you in general?
Yeah, Fanta Tracks for anything Star Wars. Mark Newbold and the awesome team over there. And then I'm on Instagram at PopstarIndie and Twitter at Ross Hollebon.
Great. And Mason, I believe people can find you on Sunday at 7:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at Disney Springs at Walt Disney World at Jock Lindsay's Hangar Bar for the Coffee with Kenobi meetup. And we're going to be celebrating your 10th birthday on the Star Wars Galactic Star Cruiser trip with Coffee with Kenobi and MEI and Mouse Fan Travel. How excited are you, buddy?
Insanely excited.
Yeah, I can't wait. I know a lot of people are very, very excited to meet and chat with you too.
Happy early birthday, buddy.
Thank you.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
There's no one here.